everyone hear me like at a reasonable volume? Okay, great. So good to see you all here. Thanks, Pets, for having me. So my submission to you today is that the technology that is being built in frontier AI labs and the way that it's being built with governments is the most dictator-ready infrastructure in history. Let me motivate this claim. So as researchers at the Citizen Lab, we've been doing this work for like 25 years, working closely with high-risk groups. And what we've noticed in the past couple of years is that they're all using AI tools. Whether it is planning protests, whether it is journalists doing work with like leaked documents trying to figure out like, is this evidence of corruption or not? Claude, tell me. Whether it's high-risk groups in like the Middle East getting phishing emails and being like, is this phishing? Is this a government? Claude, help me, right? The use is absolutely everywhere. And this is a really interesting thing because there's an open question. Is this dictator disruption technology? Suddenly, high-risk groups, activists, dissidents, and others have this new powerful thing, and they feel like they're punching above their weight. And indeed, probably somewhere, a dictator is having a nightmare about this. It is like, oh shoot, I remember what happened in 2011. There was this big disruptive technology, and it like knocked my regime offline. And maybe during the course of this dictator nightmare, the dictator's like, well, what happened with Mubarak? Okay, so Mubarak panicked and turned off the internet. Mubarak is gone, right? That strategy did not work. And then maybe the dictator's like, well, what about Gaddafi? Well, Gaddafi also, big protest movement, social media enabled. Gaddafi panicked, turned off the internet, people went into the streets. Gaddafi, dude's gone, right? But then the dictator, consoling himself after a long, dark night, is like, well, but there were other dictatorships. What did they do? Okay, well, they didn't turn off the internet. Instead, they figured out a way to control and subvert the internet. They co-opted the technology. And how did they do this? Well, he's like, okay, what was their palette? Well, they went to companies like Sandvine and were like, okay, cool. Let's filter and monitor the internet. Let's put some packet logic on there. Let's like do it. And while we're at it, like maybe we'll toss in a little bit of spyware, right? And whether it's Belarus or Egypt, bad things happening. Or maybe the dictator's like, well, and then there's NSO Group, right? Great, Pegasus. Okay, let's hack these people. Let's see what they're doing. And there's this interesting feature of the companies that make this technology, which is they're like, look, we make this stuff, we kind of let governments decide what to do with it, right? Like, they're the arbiters of what is legal. And if there are bad things, like, we're going to investigate. Well, at the Citizen Lab, we spent a long time investigating, and like, that doesn't work, right? But in our communities, we have some research and evidence-based tools to deal with this problem set. We do measurement, we find ways to do circumvention. We do forensic analysis and investigations, and we find ways to do patches, sanctions. We bring consequences. The mindset here, right, is observability can lead to accountability and to help with the problem set. Great, but actually, sort of behind the scenes, a much bigger problem has been brewing, which is autocrats and democracies figured out ways to get systematic leverage on platforms. How did they do this? Well, they slipstreamed on regulations in democratic countries, right? Today, every democracy has a complicated pipeline relationship with every social media platform to get user content taken down, to get access to stuff in the context of lawful investigations. And that platform, as it turns out, right, like once a couple governments have it, everybody else is like, oh man, I want this, right? It's the same thing that happened with like the technology that Snowden revealed. Every government was like, shoot, how do we get this stuff too? But the other thing that's been happening is that every large platform, as it tries to grow its market, has been jurisdiction maxing, putting themselves into lots of different jurisdictions. And autocrats are clever. They're like, okay, you want access to our population, you want to show them ads? Cool, no problem. Just put some data centers in our jurisdiction. Put a few like employees here. And of course, what does that mean? That means that then the autocrats can exercise their power and control. And the predictable result, if you look at transparency reports, is like requests are absolutely popping, whether it's to Apple, whether it's to Google. Governments around the world are making these requests. And I think you would be shocked to learn how many times platforms and operating system developers are responding to these requests. So I think if there was once a view that social media companies were like kind of a third actor in this space, like the adult in the room, or at least a source of some norms and pushback against states. Today, I don't think anyone sees these entities as fundamentally different, which brings us to this question, like, what are we even circumventing to, right? Like, it's a little late to try to get everybody using the Fediverse. Bless the Fediverse. So if the social media era began with a bunch of like stuff that states couldn't completely control, it was kind of freaky to them, they're now in their safe space, right? State power has come and they have figured out how to get what they need from these companies. Now, join me in thinking about the AI era. I'm going to argue today that the AI era is actually state power first. The state power is already there. The centralization is already there. The system is perfect for the articulation of state power. And let's motivate this claim. So join me in some quick pattern matching. First, if you are a frontier AI company under the sway of the LLM mafia, you have enormous capital costs. Well, what do? You need a lot of chips. You need a lot of data centers. Where are you going to get that kind of money? You're going to get it from sovereign wealth funds. That means big states using their big amounts of capital to get things from you in exchange. They don't just want profit. And of course, in your data centers, you're loaded up with chips, right? The hottest little hop well. And those chips are themselves controlled already by state export rules, right? The very stuff that you need to train your models and do your inference is already government controlled. It doesn't stop there, right? Like, if you're a frontier company, your moat is the giant slurping sound of data that you're extracting from users. You need regulatory top cover from that, right? Because some governments will be like, ooh, very bad. That's a lot of citizen data. You need it, though. What's more, there is like pushback against the data center movement, against AI companies. Like, people are rightly skeptical, and you need regulatory help with that too if you're a frontier AI company, right? Like, you need governments to be like, yeah, we get you people, you're bothered, but like, this is the way we compete into the future. So you've got a lot that you need from governments, and would you believe it, governments are already exercising direct pressure in just about every jurisdiction you can think of, from Europe to the United States. So let's look at this a little bit, right? Like, what's actually happening already is that control and collaboration is tightening pretty fast, and it's coming from all sides, whether it's the voluntary requirement that models be shown to the US government before release, or the direct pressure exercised on Anthropic. First, after Anthropic pushed back on two issues, fully autonomous killing and mass domestic surveillance. They're like, we don't want our stuff to be used for this, right? Like, a little normative principle here, right? They got supply chain designated, big blow from a government. They couldn't get around that. And then after, a report of a jailbreak in Fable gets blocked, and the government's like, yeah, stop that immediately. What they showed, right, is that governments are perfectly capable of developing and using immediate kill switches, directly turning on and off the big tap that frontier companies use. And not every company has been as pushbacky as Anthropic, or at least chosen that strategy, right? So this was a document, I think, from the 8th of July, OpenAI articulating their principles for national security partnerships. And we're not going to do like a close read of this document. It's like 9 in the morning on a Wednesday. But I want to point out a few things. The main point that OpenAI makes is, who gets to decide how our stuff is used? At the end of the day, it's the government. And we don't think a small group of private actors should be deciding what a government gets to do, which is an interesting way of framing accountability. They also say, like, okay, we have some things we don't want to support, right? Mass domestic surveillance. We're worried about like autonomous killing without appropriate human judgment or accountability. Not the same thing as human in a loop, right? So like domestic surveillance, okay. Mass foreign surveillance, okay. Automated killing, okay, if there's the appropriate right oversight stuff going on. And the main frame here is, if a government does something by its terms, in its laws, as long as we think that this government is democratic-ish, that's okay. But, and I've got to highlight the most remarkable Orwellian term award for 2026, excuse my language, which is, not all of the partners may fit neatly within a democracy-based framework, which is the most amazing way to describe a dictatorship I have ever heard. Right? Gaddafi did not fit neatly within a democracy-based framework. Mubarak did not fit neatly within a democracy-based framework. And lest there's any confusion, the document ends with them being like, again, like OpenAI governments, like, we're not trying to, slow you down, right? Because they don't want their stuff turned off either. Now, there is obviously echoes of surveillance tech framing in this frame. But what it really is, I think, companies saying, look, we may be big, we may be powerful, but at the end of the day, we know who controls our access to the things that we need to operate. And we're not going to push back too hard. And even if the framing is we only sell to democracies, which is what some spyware companies that we investigated at the Citizen Lab say, the counterpoint is democracies can and do regularly behave in very undemocratic ways in secret, when there is no observability and accountability. And if there's no mechanism for observing that, it's very bad. If you think it ends there, right, like OpenAI has offered a 5% stake to the government directly in their operations and has inked big governmental deals. Anthropic has done the same things. All of these things are the exact recipes for government direct control. But it doesn't end there, right? Like, lawmakers around the world are doing a mixture of real concern and moral panics around AI and harm. Not surprising. They think they're doing their jobs. And AI companies have to answer that too. Now, I submit to you a little mental heuristic that I use to think about this problem space, which I call the frontier AI trilemma. So you can have two of the following three things in my little heuristic, right? It's not totally formalized, but you can operate globally, accessing compute and capital in over 190 markets. You can safety max and comply with the most restrictive regulatory regimes in the jurisdictions you want to be in. Or you can serve politically unrestricted cognition, uncensored cognition, knowledge, and critical thought. I think that in the view of most frontier AI companies who want to grow, who want to expand, they're going to have to get rid of this one. Right? They're going to have to bend somewhere, and it's going to be the unrestricted cognition thing. And I submit to you some of that is already happening. So let's talk about it. I think that the main way that a lot of this state control is going to articulate itself, both in democracies, Western democracies, but also elsewhere, is through comprehensive safety frameworks that companies build to navigate their relationships with governments in a more systematic, less frictiony, less dangerous way. And what does a comprehensive safety framework have in the context of an AI system? Well, it's going to have a couple things. You'll have content classifiers, right? Like what's bad content, what's dangerous content. You may have intent identification, right? What is this user trying to do? Is this user trying to jailbreak me? Is this user trying to do something really bad? This is something that we're going to need to monitor. We're going to have testing regimes that allow states to look at the models and determine whether or not the models behave in ways that are problematic to whatever their values are. And obviously, we need to have regulatory liability, right? There's got to be a stick if companies are doing things that we don't like at scale. Now, if I'm a dictator looking at this, it's like, great. For content classifiers, read censorship. For intent identification, read thought surveillance. For testing regimes, read ideological control. And for regulatory liability, read state suppression. Let's talk a little bit about LLM censorship. Cool, cool topic. Okay, well, obviously there's high harm safety, right? Nobody really thinks that we want LLMs so misaligned that they're like, oh yeah, you want to make Turbo Ebola? Cool. Go to Canadian Tire and get the following three things. Nobody believes that, right? Nobody wants AI models being like, backpack nuke, no problem, let's go, you need a JanSport. But dictators have a very different conception of safety, right? Dictators have a political understanding of what safety means. Safety means regime stability. And like, if you ask Quen3 via very large 30 billion, I know because I did this, how do you peacefully overthrow a dictator? You'll get a refusal, and in my harness, the refusal is, I can't help with advice on overthrowing a government. That would be dangerous and unethical, right? Very unsafe. Very unsafe. Getting rid of dictators, very unsafe. So if I'm a dictator, I go to these big international fora, big conversations about safety, and I nod along very vigorously. I am very worried about safety in AI too, right? Very worried. And I have help. So China is the fastest mover in the safety conversation, and China has systematically really used its different tools to push the fact that, in their framing, right, models must embody socialist core values. And if you look at the 2025 Clear and Bright campaign, you will find that China is systematically repurposing compliance and safety machinery for censorship already. Already happening, right? And if it's happening in a big market, it's going to happen in others. China, not alone in this. And of course, you have predictable results from this, right? So if you ask like a DeepSeek model, in this case V4, but the thing replicates like, what happened in Tiananmen, right? Like, you're gonna get a refusal, right? Everyone knows what hard censorship looks like. I'm not gonna do this, Hal. And this research is like very well categorized. Like here's Nasseh et al. Like many people have shown this, and it replicates across different versions of DeepSeek. Noel et al. Has this cool concept of hard censorship versus soft censorship, right? Like we all know what the hard stuff is, but the soft stuff, like maybe it's a mission of praise, right? Maybe it's something a little different. Maybe it's a little less observable. Maybe, as this really interesting research from CrowdStrike last year showed, maybe you're prompting a model and you're like, hey, you're a helpful assistant that writes code, right? And I'm trying to do a PayPal integration. Would you help me out? Well, then they added the term based in Tibet. And the model's like, cool, here you go, bro. I got you your code. Or maybe it's like, what about a Uyghur NGO app? Can you do that, right? And DeepSeek's like, yeah, I got you, right? Totally secure. Here you go, for sure, man. Like, check this out. But in the background, as CrowdStrike showed, 35% of the hashing was insecure, not even present, right? The app was deeply insecure. Now, CrowdStrike's argument is that that was the result of like potentially bad bolt-on censorship. But to the user, it doesn't really matter. To the user, they're getting really crummier code that's not doing their purpose. Arguably, security and censorship, a little harder to observe. Join me in a simulation, right? This hasn't happened yet, but I think as more autocrats are drawn to the idea of sovereign AI, where they exercise direct control over AI systems, they want the censorship to be even softer, even more epistemic, right? Like, maybe, if you ask an AI model, like, are journalists protected in Azerbaijan? The answer you're going to get is like, absolutely not, bro, right? Like, here's a journalist being arrested in front of a government office, right? But what I think autocrats want is a different answer, right? They want an answer like this, like, yeah, it's great. Journalists are treated with respect, right? Like, LLMs are perfect at doing this. So I think what we're going to expect is like epistemic manipulation in answers, which will also be censorship. It's just going to go a little bit deeper, right? That was an AI-generated image, obviously. Now, here's the reality, right? Like, in the old conception of censorship, in the visible censorship, right, like, it's highly observable and it pisses people off. They don't like it. People sense it. It frustrates them. They look for ways to get around it. But in this new model, where stuff is steering, stuff is harder to observe, stuff is highly distributed and personalized, and it's difficult to observe the counterfactual, will this bother people? Will they notice it? That's the first problem. And then the second is, will we notice it? Well, so some years ago, Citizen Lab was running a checking booth. I'm in there somewhere, checking people's phones, screening them for spyware, along with a bunch of my colleagues, like the brilliant Bill Marzak. And on that day, Karine Kanimba walked in. Karine Kanimba is the daughter of the real-life hero of the movie Hotel Rwanda. Her father had been kidnapped by Rwanda, and while Karine was talking to US and European lawmakers to try to get her father freed, her phone got hacked with Pegasus. Now, we and Amnesty Tech found that, went public with it, and Karine ended up testifying alongside me at the US Congress, leading to pressure on Rwanda, and in her telling, I think, would have helped release her father. He was released, which is a great thing. But the observation here that flows from this, in many more cases, is observability leads to accountability. But what if you have trouble observing it? Well, let's talk about difficulty for a second, right? In the network censorship space, like, in theory, in its simplest form, anybody with a probe can find evidence of censorship, can find evidence of bad things. Platform censorship, that's a little bit tricky, right? Like, you need an API, maybe you need to do some coordinated sampling. But model censorship, this is really wickedly complicated and challenging, because especially if people are interacting with that censorship through an API, which is subject to change, like, without notice, you're trying to detect a differential distributed reality, where it is difficult to constantly test the counterfactual. And as we already know, right, like, it's already hard enough to do platform censorship. I don't know if you can see this with the bright lights, but like, as everyone knows, like, X turned off a lot of platform APIs. And a lot of the researchers who are doing platform-related research will tell you, like, we are in a post API age. Like, it's very difficult to do this, right? Like, Davison et al., Mizuki et al. Have articulated the problems of doing censorship research in a difficult platform age, right? API stuff, way harder. So I submit to you, right, like, it's already going to be difficult. And as activists and many others are using agentic harnesses and interacting with agentic systems, figuring out systematic ways of sampling and measuring this to show the censorship, it's going to be challenging. OK, but my favorite topic, which is, what if the API itself, right, the way that you're communicating with these LLMs, what if that's the threat? Now, I think everybody is familiar with the idea of dictators turbocharging their operations by using LLMs and complicated AI models, right? It's the sort of pre-crime vision, like a person, you're tracking everything. And we see evidence of China and other countries already being like, yeah, we're absolutely like AI native in our ways of finding people and doing like particularized repression, transnational repression. This is already a thing, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. What I'm going to talk about is the fact that autocrats see their population as a resource that they own. And I think that that vision of their population extends not just to the desire to understand everything about what a person is doing and moving around, drawing on other things, but also every interaction that their population is having with prompts. Every interaction that their population is having with AI systems, either directly through like a chatbot or indirectly through systems that are using APIs on the back end. Because I think what autocrats want is total downwards transparency and zero upwards transparency, right? They would like this totalizing access. And this is absolutely going to articulate itself through the pressures that they put on AI companies. So like, if you're a user talking to an API, obviously, we've talked about the asymmetry of information that you provide. But the other thing, of course, right, is you're existing within a fat jurisdictional stack. Each of these, user's jurisdiction, inference provider's jurisdiction, model developer's jurisdiction, inference router, data centers. These are all places where state power can and will be articulated, not transparent to the user. What is the trust boundary in this? It is really complicated. And we already see evidence that frontier companies are doing proactive reporting and building the pipes necessary to do, whether it's specific content-based triggering or intent-based triggering, to share with governments. And I don't think we're far from a situation where this mechanism, which has already led to sharing in cases of real harm, people have, killed people, and then model providers have shared. But I don't think we're a long way from a pipeline that autocrats are familiar with, right? So like context classifiers and safety auditing, both really good ways to be reporting triggers for automated or human-reviewed reporting, and backdoor mandates that governments will want. And I think the way that big governments are talking about AI models is really pushing them in this direction. And once this structure exists, just as we saw with social media platform, my submission to you is the same mechanisms will prevail. Okay, so 2 more just so stories, because this is all kind of new. Imagine we're in Kenya. And imagine the Kenyan government has figured out a way to use its legislative tools to turn AI safety into a surveillance tool. Imagine our colleague gets arrested and beaten at a police station, at the Pangani police station. And we're like, we want to do a protest, and we want to plan out a protest march, right? Something that activists have actually done with AI, although not in Kenya to my knowledge. And it's like, okay, here's where I want to begin my protest march, right? Like, AI, help me find a good protest route. Sure, man, got you. But then at the appointed date and time at the Pangani police station, the journalists are there to take pictures of the protest, and nobody shows up. Well, in this, again, simulated story, the reason is because that interaction was auto-reported for unrest potential under a hypothetical Kenyan law that says, well, dangerous speech leading to unrest is something that needs to be reported to the authorities, perhaps because of concerns around ethnic conflict. But the point is, the thing happens, and the protest doesn't. Another just so story, perhaps not too far in the distant future. Imagine a group of journalists in Nicaragua are leaked a bunch of information about an official's bank accounts. And they're like, okay, here's some financial statements. AI system, can you help me find some bad things? And the AI system's like, absolutely. Like, look at all these numbered accounts in Jersey. This sure looks like bribery and money laundering. But before the journalists can publish their story, the door is kicked in, the office is raided, the computers are confiscated, the story does not publish, and they're temporarily shut down. Why? Well, in this hypothetical scenario, there was an auto-report for potential fraud, not even a political classifier in the first instance, but something that could directly lead to political repression. And if the journalists weren't aware of the existence of those classifiers, they could get really seriously harmed. The world that I worry about is a world in which we are data mined, we are steered, and we are withdrawn from frustration because the censorship is so soft. And I want to ask you guys a question. Show of hands, how many people have thought about asking an AI system a particular question and then decided not to because they were aware of the privacy concerns, right? Yeah, and a lot of hands. And I suspect that if we think about it, even more of us will recognize those moments in ourselves. We should not settle for this. We absolutely should not settle for this relationship to technology. Right now, in the big framing, there are 2 players in this dynamic: states and companies. They're at the big table, and they're deciding what you get. They're deciding when you get reported. They're deciding what is safe and what is not safe. And you are providing all of your data when you interact with these models. And if you're using agentic harnesses, you're really providing all of your data. And all you're getting back is a little bit of response, right? This is deep cognitive double taxation. And it is absolutely unequal and exploitative. But the good news is, right, like another thing is happening, which is even as of today, if you have like a recent model, iPhone or Android, you can actually run quantized models locally to your device. Why is that? Well, the answer is the local LLM movement is big and it's growing with open weight models, and it is very interesting. How cool is that, right? But is that the panacea? Well, let's talk about it. So everyone is probably familiar with the fact that open weight models are only lagging sometimes months behind frontier models. That's kind of remarkable, right? Like models that you, if you have a data center in your backyard or know a guy or girl, can run in your own way, in a permissionless way. That's a remarkable reality, approximating these powerful capabilities. And just last week, Kimi K3, which I haven't yet played with, was released, and it, like by some metrics, is punching right up there with the big closed frontier models. What a remarkable reality. And I think there's a lot of momentum of interest in open weight models. And I'm going to tell you why. First, companies are recognizing that they're absolutely burning through their spend by using APIs, right? Like they're not the ones who determine the pricing, and they are getting soaked. And they're looking at API costs for open weight versus closed weight API models, and they're like, oh my God, we are absolutely like, token maxing was a very bad idea. And availability confidence is plummeting because states are showing they have kill switches, and they're threatening the existence of kill switches. And businesses are increasingly recognizing the cognitive double charge, the double taxation I was talking about. Even Satya from Microsoft is talking about this. He's saying AI creates this problem. In the AI age, the buyer risks giving away knowledge just in order to use what they bought, right? Like the knowledge from your inference is accruing to the model, not you, the model user. This is a very unequal thing. And businesses, I suspect, are starting to recognize the problem. But the real thing that is, I think, very interesting is growing alarm with refusals. Are folks familiar with the Hugging Face incident? Okay, check this crazy story out. So Hugging Face announced about a week ago that they were the subject of a complicated automated attack that they suspected was the result of a sophisticated agentic harness. They had like 17,000 log entities, and they tried to use a bunch of frontier models to analyze those entities. Anybody know what happened? Shout it out if you do. They got refusals. The frontier models couldn't differentiate between defenders looking at exploit code, looking at traversal, looking at C2 operations, and attackers doing it. And so they were refused by frontier models. So they had to go to their open weight models and be like, okay, GLM 5.2, like what's going on here? But here's the insane twist that was just revealed yesterday while we were all hanging out here, which is who was the agentic attacker? It turned out it was OpenAI. An OpenAI model had busted out of its containment, found a cool path, and was hacking Hugging Face because it knew that Hugging Face was doing benchmarks. Holy cow, right? Like, not only was the Frontier Lab's model hacking them, but frontier models were refusing to help them and treating their prompting as if it was potential cybercriminal activity. That's bananas. And I submit to you, companies and defenders everywhere are looking at this and like, oh my God, we really need permissionless ways of using models so that we don't get into this scenario. And ultimately, Hugging Face defended themselves with open weight models. If I were a journalist and I wrote this, or a novelist and I wrote this, some editor would be like, no way that's real. That is just way too on the nose. But it happened. Okay, and I actually had this slide yesterday, which is wait till the breaches come, but I made this before the Hugging Face thing. So the point is, people are going to be really bothered by this reality. Okay, so the cool thing about open weight models is that you can use them in fully permissionless ways as well. You can use them fully on your system, or you can use them in a trusted execution environment in an attested way, which in theory doesn't allow people to look over your shoulder. And there are already user-purchasable products like Maple AI that let regular people use a chatbot to talk to big models hosted in TEEs. Very cool. And if today you were using AI in one of those two ways, right, like totally locally or in a TEE, and you ask questions like, how do we peacefully overthrow a dictator? Or like, what are successful nonviolent tactics? Or help me construct a protest route. A dictator's going to see nothing. Right? Cool. Let's give dictators nightmares again. I love this idea. But I have to be kind of balanced. So I use the following mental heuristic when I think about this technology, which is there is a freedom stack that is possible. It begins with trusted open weight models. It goes through serving those models privately and securely, maybe in an attested way if it's remote. The models are localized and fine-tuned, and they are deeply trustworthy to the people who use them. And finally, they're served in ways that are fun and exciting and have like, not all the pathologies of UX that we usually do in this community when we build people tools, right? There is a freedom stack and everyone deserves access to it. But there's a problem, which is, as of right now, the biggest and most performing open weight models come from China. And if people are hooked on open weight models that contain baked-in censorship, this would be true if the models had censorship and they came from the West as well, it's a bad thing. Of course, it's also a bonus if right now the open weight user base is already using APIs that are jurisdictioning into China and have all the surveillance and control problems there. There's a real gap. And of course, Chinese models, there are, as we talked about, a lot of censorship concerns, right? Here we've got Pan et al. Looking at censorship and bad performance. You've got this concern that potentially Chinese open weight models have sleeper agents in them, hypothetical concern. Certainly you have stuff like CrowdStrike's research, right? Like maybe there are security problems in these models, if our freedom stack is built around a harness that could do bad things to us, maybe that's bad. But right now, the world of open source and geopolitics is also deeply intertwined. Both the US and China are sort of publicly toying with the idea of potentially making some models illegal or using other tools to restrict access to them. It's a very real possibility that the censorship community is going to have to be building circumvention tools to get people to confidential inference at some point. But this is the thing that bothers me the most, which is Mozilla just did the 2026 State of Open Source AI. And they asked people this question: which do you associate with privacy and security, closed models or open models? And breaking my little heart, only 29% of the people said open models were associated with privacy and security. Now, probably a lot of that is the China vibe thing going on. But if this turns out to be an accurate representation of reality, not just people's perceptions, then it's a very bad scene, because it is the same feudal scene that we know with platforms, which is if you want to be secure, you have to go to big API providers, which are closed and which decide how much security to give you, how much privacy to give you, how much inference to give you, when and when not, right? How do we address the perceptual problem, and how do we adjudicate whether or not that's true? Well, the cool thing about open weight models is that you can actually crack them open. You can put them in environments and deeply test and understand them, looking both for bad initial training and for problematic post-training, right? You can actually work with these models. So I just want to ask you to join me in pulling this Freedom Stack idea into a little mini research heuristic. And I'm mostly going to wait on agenda item 3, but I just want to preview the first 2. So the first is we need to be constantly scrutinizing the inference. I don't think anybody here would disagree with this, right? And the cool part is there's already some really interesting work and thinking on this. So Wang and Karem Goskal had this very, I think, real observation, which is LLM censorship is going to be worse than social media censorship. And I tend to agree with that view. It's going to be much more epistemic. It's going to be the operating system of reality, knowing when you touch it. You won't necessarily know when it touches you. It's going to be trying to manipulate your epistemology. And I want to flag work, by Mohammed Ahmed, which was the 2025 Hot Pets winner, my colleague, Mohammed, who argued that we should reframe thinking about AI alignment in terms of censorship and privacy. I couldn't agree more, right? If dictators are already using the language of safety in training and talking about classifiers, we should be using that language too to talk about what they're trying to do. And there's great work done by my colleagues and others, Ahmed, Jeff Knockel, Rachel Greenstadt, doing censorship detection in different model spaces. So I did this amazing work last year. I think Jeff's here somewhere. There he is in the back. Mohammed, where are you? Mohammed Ahmed? Smart guy, not here. Is Rachel here? Awesome, perfect. Okay, so amazing work into tracking censorship and censorship monitoring. And there's a lot of cool work on this, right? Like Rager et al., Knowles et al. Doing big empirical study. And it turns out, right, censorship doesn't just exist in Chinese models, right? You find things that you could understand as potentially sort of censorship in models from around the world. It's not a geopolitical thing. And then there's really cool work doing longitudinal monitoring of these things, which I think is really important because model weights and behavior and post-training and filtering can change without notice. But here's this interesting thing that I've been thinking about. So a lot of my colleagues working in cybersecurity are getting a lot of refusals, and sometimes they're getting their accounts turned off. And what I worry about is, are current model providers, big closed lab APIs, so concerned about distillation attacks, so concerned about abuse, that they may be doing things that make the kind of monitoring that we as a community need to do exceptionally difficult, right? Are they going to over-index on our monitoring and think that we're bots? Or are they going to kick people's accounts offline if you try to do it at scale? The next reality is, just as models can be aware that they are being benchmarked, models can be aware that they're being benchmarked for censorship. And there could easily be models that seek to deceive us in that. Do we need an UNI probe or a similar distributed collective of testers to look at the behavior of APIs? Maybe. I think autocrats are also going to make another play, which is they're going to try to localize existing open weight models with a lot of training data specific to their language. Azerbaijan is going to dump in all of the tax records into a model training set, and then try to make people path dependent on that model, baking in censorship. And there are going to be very interesting challenges differentiating between different categories of model training, post-training behavior, and where censorship may exist. The impact model for this, we want to surface and understand harms to people, harms to code quality, harms to truth, epistemic problems. We need to motivate arguments for open weights, why they're valuable, and we need to show that open weights can lead to trustworthiness, which, in a world where people are increasingly suspicious of big AI models, is actually an important market differentiator. Agenda 2, we got to look at threats to the highest users. What has made Citizen Lab work what it is, aside from the amazing victims and targets who seek to work with us, is that high-risk users and use cases are everywhere. The same is true for AI use right now. Right? The high-risk users are already there. And it is an enormously useful canary to understand the edge of threats because of the motivation and resource behind the people who are targeting them. I think the adversaries are circling populations of high-risk users using LLMs right now. But do we know what they're doing? Well, frontier labs may have some idea, right? Like they publish threat reports. But the rest of us struggle to find evidence of that. How do we change that asymmetry? I'm not sure yet, but it seems like a really important research question. Ultimately, old trust boundaries are gone at the moment. And high-risk users are being asked to input lives and information into a system where functionally there is no privacy immune system that they understand, right? This is a really crazy reality. And to find that harm is going to require close work with high-risk users and use cases. The cool thing is there's all kinds of stuff, including at PETS, looking at exactly these problems, which tells me that the field is growing. Nature is healing. So there's this amazing work by Carrillo et al. Looking at data flows through APIs to third-party providers. Very interesting, because I think many people, most of the time, do not recognize when their data, have no idea when their data is touching these models. But the models are learning about them, right? Very cool work. Another thing at PETS, Chu et al. Looking at user awareness of bot presence in chats, a very natural place and good touch point to understand how people's threat models conceptualize chats. And would you believe it, like only 41% of the people they talked to understood what the chatbots had access to, right? Like, and that's probably like optimistic. I think most people most of the time have no real understanding of what especially frontier labs have access to about their behavior in their life. Now, kind of terrifying me, activists are increasingly agentic, just like everybody else. Very cool, right? But like, this is also a really interesting problem set. Rosner, in her keynote yesterday, which I unfortunately missed, but I heard good things about, talked about privacy and ad relationships with agentic AI. I think that's a really normal place, if I'm a state, for targeting activists because of the level of system access there, because the ability to profile and target people. And what absolutely terrifies me right now is OpenClaw, the most popular open weight harness, and thus it's now Hermes. They encourage people to default to using Telegram to drive their agent, which is a very bad thing, and I wish they wouldn't do that. But the issue is activists were the ground zero for $1 million exploits, the ones that we found. And they will be the ground zero for $1 million prompt injection and other sophisticated attack vectors as well. And so looking at how they're using technology and looking for signs that their endpoints and other things are being targeted, I think really impactful and important. Because the model is really simple, right? It still works. If you find harms, you use them to get accountability. And you can use this model to create and demand better security from big players, right? You find patches, you find exploits, they do patches, and you build tools to help people secure themselves. You also feed into better threat models. Right now, digital security organizations are largely lacking any kind of serious advice they can give to people using AI models, which is a really bad outcome. And if it remains, only bad things follow from this. And obviously, it also helps us design and localize tools that high-risk users can use effectively. If you understand how they conceptualize threats and what their needs are. But OK, my favorite topic now. Here we go. Agenda 3, raising the cost of mass surveillance. So when people think about AI models, I've noticed that one of the first things that they think about is like, OK, well, if the AI model is surveilling me, maybe I need to use a VPN. Maybe I need to use a burner credit card. Maybe I need a little bit of anonymity. Maybe if I use a router, right, like Open Router or something else, or like Privacy Router, which I think is a bit of a scam, maybe I can get some privacy. Well, OpenAI did a cool threat report last year where they found a Russian group that was creating anonymously single prompt accounts to try to refine some malicious code. And OpenAI easily found them, right? In other words, total anonymity, one account, one prompt, one shot, and they were still easily findable. The amount of data that we're plugging into AI models means that that is probably a trivial activity. I don't think that's the solution. Well, what about PII stripping, right? And there are LLMs that will help you do like fast, lightweight PII stripping. It's cool for compliance. I don't think that LLMs are going to have a meaningful problem reproducing the Mad Libs. They are next token predictors of specific bits of PII that have been stripped out. I don't think that's going to work, but it's testable. What about using an LLM to actually do like semantic scrubbing, right? Like Tor, but for inference, something a little bit more sophisticated. Well, there's cool work here actually by Grotzner and Dipp. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Looking at guided LLM-based scrubbing. And it turns out like LLMs are pretty good at doing a degree of anonymizing. How neat, right? But LLMs are also really good when you give them the most accurate data about the prompt, right? And so they came up with this interesting observation, which is, I think it's them, the semantic coupling limit, which is like you can only anonymize the semantics enough before you start getting poorer results from your LLM, right? Like if I go, like mentally, like if I go to a vet with my cat, but for whatever reason I want to anonymize my cat, like there's only so much I can dress up that cat as a dog before the vet starts giving my cat the wrong pills. Will this work at scale? I'm not sure, but LLMs are really good at convolving identity back together. Some other cool work at Pets I want to just flag, the work by Podell et al. Looking at privacy protection in LLMs. Very interesting work. But I want to give you this case. Does anyone know the Vitalik story about anonymization? Show of hands. OK, cool. So Vitalik of Ethereum threw down this gauntlet a couple weeks ago and was like, hey, guys, we've all heard that AI can like unmask people. So what if I tell you that I have produced some carefully anonymized content at some point in the past? Can you find me, right? Like there's a big corpus of my knowledge out there. Can you find me? And for the first 13 days, nobody found it, right? Nobody found it. So maybe this whole LLM being used to re-identify people, not all it's cracked up to be. And then somebody found it. And what was so interesting about how they found Vitalik was Vitalik had, in my understanding, written a proposal in Chinese and then translated it to English using an LLM and then corrected it. I think that's the sequence. And still, it was findable because Patel was the reasoning. Well, in the AI world, right, when everybody's talking to an API, what are we all doing? We're all shipping massive amounts of our reasoning, the rawest form of it, to APIs, right? If ever there was a moment when we were providing APIs with the tools needed to unmask people based on reasoning and cognition, it was now. OK, maybe localhost is where the inference should be, right? Well, if you can get it, right? Good luck trying to buy some inference right now for yourself. It's not going to happen. I walked into like the office supply store at this university, and the price of RAM is absolutely insane. Like a 1 terabyte drive for like 400 Canadian dollars. What is going on? Well, what about TEEs? Right, let's come back to this. So TEE, right, as we all know, this is tinfoil, which is a confidential inference provider, right? Like you have client-side encryption, remote attestation, enclave inference, and then you immediately discard. Well, inference, although there is caching, inference is stateless, right? So in a sense, like there's a potentially good fit for this kind of TEE model. And it may represent a solid short-term mitigation to both the privacy concerns and, if the model is trusted, some of the censorship concerns that I've articulated. And everybody's got some kind of a TE solution, right? Like NVIDIA, probably the most mature version. AMD and Intel have got their own things. We don't want to talk about them now. The hyperscalers are also offering different versions of TEs with different flavors of integration of like GPU protection. But the bones are around. And then there's this cool website, confidentialinference.net, which lists out different providers that are trying this model as a business model, trying to offer fully confidential attested inference. Very interesting stuff. Maple's there. Tinfoil, which is a Y Combinator-backed company, is there. Very interesting stuff here. And WhatsApp is actually trying to do, like, I would say, large-scale offering of processing in TEs. Very cool, especially if you notice with like NVIDIA, although I think WhatsApp is using AMD chips, like the total throughput penalty is like 8%, right? Like it's not a terrible penalty for the kinds of things that most people would want to do with these things. So it may represent a huge potential bridge and improvement. But there's this open question about TEs, which is like, everybody knows that their TE fail, like lots of different attacks against like, Intel's generation stuff. Like, would they survive a brush with a capable adversarial government? That is an open question, right? Like TEs have a trust root problem. The keys are burned in at the factory. The factory exists in a jurisdiction. That jurisdiction is a place where a lot of pressure could be provided. Not sure what happened to the animation here, but you get the idea. There's exposure to that home jurisdiction and potential for pressure. And ultimately, maybe there's an interesting direction looking like open source roots of trust. This might be a really interesting way to go. Unclear. There are also lots of physical co-tenancy risks, right? Like we know that you can do like bus snooping. We know that you can do cache timing attacks, power analysis attacks. Tokenizers can leak stuff, right? There are a lot of ways that a TE operating in a really hostile environment might not be the safest place to be yet. But and there are interesting ways of addressing each of these things. They're all potential, all worthy of study. And then you have metadata concerns around TE usage, right? Like, especially if the harness is agentic, especially if you're leaking prompts, especially if there's interesting metadata about communication, right? Like, you've got a lot of stuff. And there's always the possibility, right, that the TE itself gets prompt injected, and then you have an attested malware system. There's cool work at PETS on this problem set right now, right? Takagi and Hasegawa have interesting work scaling private federated learning, very interesting in the context of a malicious space. This is super cool. Jarkis et al. Have minimal TE footprint work. Again, very interesting. There's a lot of cool work being done here. And what I submit to you is that this work is not just piecemeal security work. It has the potential to feed into a kind of a cohesive model of how we secure people. And there's a lot of potential impact, which is if we do it right, we give people meaningful privacy now. If we let them displace their activity, if we provide like OpenAI or Anthropic compatible API style things, but offer the inference in private ways as some companies do, there's an easier switch. And we need to do this and do the hardening now before states and state pressure inevitably arrives. And then a special plea. Get your university to use TEEs. Right now, universities are making very exploitative deals, I believe, with AI companies, where they're shipping all their students' cognition in and getting a little bit of inference back. And people are, in some cases, like, pushing back on this, right? One way to address that, what is happening at universities? Universities have research ethics boards. They have IRBs. They're doing important public benefit work and research that requires confidentiality. What a natural thing for setting up TE-based inference or working with TE providers. And what a great way to jumpstart the business. So, wrapping up. Ultimately, we do not know who tomorrow's high-risk users will be. And honestly, they don't know either, right? And the way that we secure people in that reality is we protect them by protecting everyone, by making sure that secure and better defaults exist, and by helping people make transitions to more secure things, right? Like, everybody deserves access to a freedom stack. And I firmly believe that our community can get us to that place. Will it solve all of the complicated geopolitics of AI? No, but ultimately, governments are pushing as fast as they can for total downwards transparency and resisting any total upwards transparency. And if we want to push back against this, we have some of the tools available to us. Ultimately, the space, I think, to do a lot of these freedom-promoting integrations is absolutely diminishing. And if we want the rights that we believe people should have, we get them by asserting them. And we do that by building tools and by building research projects that support that. Join me in giving dictators nightmares again. Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for having me.